All right, guys, welcome back to part 5 of this 10-part intro to Java programming tutorial. If you're enjoying these videos, please go ahead and give it a like. If you have any comments, questions, suggestions, please leave them down below. Now, in the previous video, we discussed methods and we learned about the return statements. We wrote a couple of methods here like add, subtract, multiply, divide. And now in this video, we're going to discuss loops. So what are loops? Why are they useful? So let's go ahead and get right into it. So a loop is something that will run over and over again until some condition is met. So suppose you want to do something several times over and over again without having to write the same code. And now we can just use an example like you have to pick up a box, walk it to the end of the room and put it down, and then walk over, pick up another box, walk over, put it down, and then you keep doing that and doing that and doing that. Now imagine that we have code and we try to do the same thing. So I'll give you an example. Imagine we wanted to add these like 120 and we wanted to do it 10 times. So we would have to copy and paste, copy and paste, copy and paste. And we would have to do this over and over again until we get the right amount that we're trying to do. Now, you can imagine that this would get really, really cumbersome. It would get super long. You would have this repeated multiple times. Now, a loop allows you to repeat a piece of code until some condition is met. So we can say something like, hey, I want to add 120 and I want to print it to the screen 1,000 times. Now, do you want to copy this over 1,000 times? Or would you rather have a mechanism to do that? So imagine we have this, our code can get really long and it's not pleasant. So let's go ahead and just remove this. We copied this over many, many times. And let's just talk about loops. And let's write our first loop. So there's two different types of loops, or rather what we're going to talk about, two types of loops in Java. And the first one is called a for loop. And this is how we write a for loop. So a for loop has three main components to it. So we're going to say for, and we'll just wrap that in parentheses, and we'll just create our curly braces just so that that's nice and ready for us. And within these parentheses, we need to have a starting condition. So the starting condition is going to say, we're going to define it by saying int x equals 0, or rather we'll use the standard I equals 0 that you may see in other reading. Then a semicolon. So we'll say this is the starting condition. We're defining that we're going to start at 0. Then the next will be our ending condition. So we'll say for integer or I less than, we'll say 10. And then another semicolon. So again, this is our starting condition. And we're defining I as an int. So we're saying for int I equals 0. So start at 0. And then I less than 10. So we're saying until we reach 10. So we're going to run it for 0, then 1, then 2, then 3, 4, all the way up until 10. Once it hits this condition 10, it'll just say, okay, I'm done running everything that's within here. And then I'll move on to something below over here. All right. So we're going to remove this here. And the last thing we need in the loop is, what do we do with our defined variable here? So what we want to do is increment it by 1. And one of the things that we can do in Java is say just I++, which is essentially just saying I equals I plus 1. So we're just adding 1. All right. So we're going to say I++. So I equals I plus 1. So what happens here is, and we'll just add something within the statement here, just so it makes more sense. We'll just copy this addition that we had here. So instead of copying it 10 times, which is what we had here, and I can just do this one more time for you guys. instead of doing this 10 times manually, now we're telling Java, hey, I want you to run this piece of code 10 times for me. So it's going to say, okay, for this integer starting at 0, while it's less than 10, I will increment I by 1, and I will run this and then come back to the start of the loop. So it's going to say, okay, it's 0. It's still less than 10. I'm not going to increment until I reach the end of this line, and I will run what's within these curly braces. So it's going to say it's 0. It's going to print out the sum of 120. Then it's going to add 1 to I. Now I is 1. So we start at 0. Now I is 1. Then it will run this piece of code. It'll add 1. Now I is 2. And then it keeps incrementing and incrementing all the way until we hit 10. So it's going to keep printing out to the screen this 120. And then once it gets to 10, it'll say, hey, 10 is not less than 10. So let me break out of this loop. So I'm just going to exit this loop here, and I'm going to run whatever is after it. So in Java, every line is run in order. So if we print things out, we should see all our answers from above. Then we should see 120 10 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Well, and 10. And just for our sake, we will add a nice little break here so we know where our loop is. So this is just a string, and we'll just say, hey, add a bunch of dashes so that it separates everything below it. And we will run our loop. We're going to print this 10 times. So we should see 120 10 times here. We should also see it 10 times afterwards, after these dashes. And then remember, after it runs everything here, it's going to repeat 10 times. Then it's going to run the stuff underneath it. So I will print out to the screen. Forgot a dot here. I will print out to the screen something random like, hello again, I'm done. All right, so again, we will run this piece 10 times, and then afterwards we'll exit this loop and it'll print out, hello again, I'm done. So let's go ahead and run that again. We will recompile our code, and there's easier ways to do this. Like IntelliJ will actually take care of it for you. You can actually hit this run here if you want, but we'll just continue doing it the traditional way. That way we continue to understand how these things work. So we'll go and exit this mode. We'll open up our terminal again. We will just you can type clear just to clean up your terminal. And we will say Java C. So this will compile again, create the machine code, and then we'll tell Java, hey, run this for me. And now we'll just take a quick look. So we have all the output from before. We have 120 printed out from here, all these print statements that we copy and pasted. But hey, look at this. Now if we look under these dashes, so we printed out these dashes, that's right here. We have our loop, which ran 10 times and did the same exact thing. And then afterwards, we broke out of this loop and we printed, hello again, I'm done. So how awesome is that? We reduced all this into 3 lines in Java. How fantastic is that? So we'll go ahead and just remove this. We'll rerun it. And here we see that we were able to do a lot of computation in a very small amount of code. So this is the power of loops. This is a for loop. And in Java, we can also have a while loop. So a while loop looks somewhat different, and I will show you that one. So it starts the same way. Instead of a for, we'll just have a while. So while some condition is not met, I'm going to do something. So we'll say something like, we'll write the same thing just in while format. So instead of for each time do something, we'll say while this is not met, just run. So we'll create a new variable called j, and we'll instantiate that to 0. So we're creating a new variable, and this is the same thing we've done previously. We're just going to say int j is equal to 0. And we'll say while j is less than 10, do something. So you're free to use whichever loop you want. You can say, hey, I want to use a while loop, or I want to use a for loop for this. Whichever one you find easier, whichever one you find cleaner is what you can use. So we'll say while j is less than 10, then we will print out, let's do the division this time. We'll just copy and paste that in here, or do whichever one you want. No need to follow me. So while j is less than 10, then we will print it out. And now you must be wondering, well, j will never be less than 10, right? Because we're saying that it's 0, and then we're saying while it's less than 10, print this out. But this will probably run into an issue, right? So even IntelliJ is telling us, well, this condition is in fact, and let me just zoom in on this, apologies for that. So even IntelliJ is telling us here that j less than 10 is always true. So this is called an infinite loop. So this will just run forever and probably crash at some point. So one of the things that we need to do is say, well, what we did here before in the for loop was we said for each iteration of the loop, or each time that we are iterating through this loop, then we will add 1 to I and increment it. So that's what we did here by saying I++. So we can do the same thing in a while loop, just it looks a little different. It may make more sense. We'll just say j++, which is the same thing as saying, and we can even write this j equals j plus 1. It's the same thing. You can write whichever one you want, j++. There we go. And now we should see the division of 120, and we should be able to print that out right below the hello, again, I'm done. And we should see 5 printed out 10 times. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and run that. And I just need to get out of presentation mode. We'll move down to our terminal. We'll clear just to clean the output up. And we'll say compile. And I'm just pressing the up arrow, by the way. This will pull up the previous commands that you have written, or you could type them out. So we're going to just say Java C or Java compile, hello world. This will compile again, turn it to machine code, and then again, we will run our program. And here we did the same thing. So let's look below these dashes, since this is what we have here. We made significant leaps in our code by making it much easier for people to read and just writing less code, less need to have so much code written on the screen. So we have 2 loops here. We have our for loop, which printed out the addition of these, and we have the while loop, which printed out the division of these 2 numbers as well. So here we see the 120s, then below the hello again, I'm done, which is this line here, 35. Then we printed 5 out 10 times, and that is loops. So that kind of takes care of the for and the while loop. And that is all for this video. If you guys like this video, please go ahead and give it a like. And In the next video, we're going to get into conditionals. So we're going to be talking a little bit about if statements or conditionals. So what do we want to do in certain cases? And this is going to be useful for when we get into our final program. So again, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.